1953. France, clinging to the last vestiges of its colonial empire, made a fateful gamble. In a remote valley in North Vietnam, they established a fortified base, designed to lure their enemy into a decisive, crushing battle. Today, we explore the strategic blunder that ended an empire. A battle where French air power and firepower met the audacious ingenuity, relentless will, and sheer human force of General Giap's Viet Minh. This is the siege that redefined asymmetric warfare. This is the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. In the spring of 1954, deep in the mountains of northwest Vietnam, a remote valley became the graveyard of an empire. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, fought from March 13th to May 7th, was not just a military engagement. It was a collision between industrial confidence and revolutionary determination, between the certainty of superior firepower and the audacity of human will. To understand what happened in that valley, we must first understand how France arrived there, and why they believed victory was inevitable. By 1954, France had been fighting the First Indochina War for nearly 8 years. What began in 1946 as a colonial reconquest had devolved into a brutal stalemate. On one side, the French Union forces, equipped with aircraft, armor, and the backing of the Western world. On the other, the Viet Minh, the communist nationalist independence movement led by Ho Chi Minh, masters of guerrilla warfare who melted into the jungle and struck without warning. The French were hemorrhaging resources. Casualties mounted. Public support at home evaporated. The war needed an ending, a decisive, conventional battle where France's technological superiority could finally be brought to bear. Enter General Henri Navarre. Navarre was a career officer, a strategist who believed the Viet Minh's greatest weakness was their inability to fight a set-piece battle. His plan, unveiled in late 1953, was audacious. Establish a fortified air-supplied base deep in enemy territory. Draw the Viet Minh into attacking it. Annihilate them with superior firepower and air support. Force them to the negotiating table. The location he chose was Dien Bien Phu, a valley in the Lai Chau province, 10 miles long and 5 miles wide, surrounded by jungle-covered hills. It sat near the border with Laos, astride key Viet Minh supply routes. On paper, it was perfect bait. It was also a trap, just not the one the French intended. In November 1953, Operation Castor began. French paratroopers dropped into the valley, swiftly securing the area. Engineers and equipment followed. Within weeks, Dien Bien Phu transformed into a fortress, a central command post surrounded by a constellation of fortified strongpoints, each dug into the hills and valley floor. The French gave these positions women's names, the mistresses of the operations commander, Colonel Christian de Castries, according to rumor. Beatrice and Gabrielle guarded the northern approaches. Anne-Marie protected the northwest. Huguette, Dominique, Claudine, Elaine, and Isabelle formed concentric rings around the central airstrip and command bunker. This airstrip was everything. Carved from the valley floor, it was the lifeline, the only way to supply the garrison with ammunition, food, reinforcements, and medical evacuations. Hanoi lay 170 miles to the east. Every transport flight was a gamble, but the French High Command was confident. After all, they controlled the skies. By early 1954, over 10,000 French Union troops, French regulars, foreign legionnaires, colonial soldiers from North Africa and Southeast Asia, and local auxiliaries, were dug into Dien Bien Phu. Artillery batteries bristled from the strongpoints. Barbed wire and minefields encircled the perimeter. The French had even installed 10 light tanks, M24 Chaffees, for mobile support. It was, the French believed, impregnable. Their confidence rested on one critical assumption: The Viet Minh could never bring heavy artillery to the valley. The surrounding mountains were too rugged, the jungle too dense, the distances too vast. Even if they managed to drag a few guns up the slopes, French air power would spot them immediately and obliterate them from above. This assumption, this certainty, would prove catastrophic. Because while the French fortified their valley stronghold, something was moving through the jungle. Something the French could not see, could not imagine, and would not believe until it was far too late. Tens of thousands of troops, hundreds of tons of supplies, and dozens of heavy artillery pieces, 105mm howitzers, Soviet-made Katyusha rocket launchers, and fearsome 37mm anti-aircraft guns, all being dismantled, carried piece by piece through impossible terrain, and reassembled in camouflaged positions on the hills overlooking the French base. The French had built a fortress in a valley, but they had given the high ground to their enemy. And in warfare, the high ground is everything. The stage was set. The trap was armed. And in March 1954, it would spring shut. If Dien Bien Phu was France's gamble, it was General Võ Nguyên Giap's masterpiece. Giap was not a professional soldier. He was a history teacher turned revolutionary, a self-taught strategist who had studied the campaigns of Napoleon and the guerrilla tactics of Mao Zedong. By 1954, he commanded the Viet Minh People's Army, a force that had grown from scattered bands of partisans into a disciplined army of over 300,000. When the French established Dien Bien Phu, Giap saw the opportunity immediately. But he also saw the danger. A frontal assault against entrenched French positions would be a bloodbath. His initial plan, a quick attack strategy to overrun the base before the French could fully fortify, was risky, perhaps suicidal. In January 1954, with his troops already positioned for the assault, Giap did something extraordinary. He cancelled the attack. Instead, he adopted a slow but sure strategy, a methodical siege that would strangle the French logistically, isolate them psychologically, and only attack when victory was assured. It was a decision that required patience, discipline, and absolute confidence in his troops' endurance. What followed was one of the greatest logistical feats in military history. Giap needed to move an army, 50,000 combat troops, plus another 50,000 support personnel, across hundreds of miles of jungle and mountain terrain. He needed to feed them, arm them, and keep them supplied for months. And most critically, he needed heavy weapons, artillery powerful enough to neutralize French air superiority and destroy their strongpoints. The French believed this was impossible. They were wrong. The solution was China. Following the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949, the People's Republic of China became a crucial ally to the Viet Minh. Chinese advisors embedded with Giap's forces. Chinese engineers helped plan the siege works. And crucially, China supplied the weapons, Soviet-designed artillery, anti-aircraft guns, ammunition, and supplies flowed across the border. But getting those weapons to Dien Bien Phu required more than trucks and railways. The roads were either non-existent or monitored by French reconnaissance aircraft. The jungle was a labyrinth. The mountains were sheer. So the Viet Minh improvised. Picture this: 200,000 civilian porters, farmers, students, men, women, even children, mobilized from across northern Vietnam. Each carried supplies on bamboo poles slung across their shoulders. Each pushed modified bicycles loaded with up to 500 pounds of rice, ammunition, or disassembled artillery parts. These bicycles, reinforced with bamboo frames, became pack animals. Porters guided them down jungle paths so narrow that two men could not walk side by side. When the trails ended, they hauled the loads on their backs. When rivers blocked the way, they built bamboo bridges under cover of night. When French aircraft circled overhead, they froze beneath camouflage and waited, motionless, for hours. The distances were staggering. Some supply columns traveled over 600 miles from the Chinese border to Điện Biên Phủ. The journey took weeks. Many porters never returned, victims of exhaustion, disease, French air raids, or accidents on treacherous mountain passes. But they kept moving. And then came the artillery. The French High Command simply could not believe the Viet Minh could transport heavy guns to the valley. A single 105 mm howitzer weighed over a ton. Disassembled, it became dozens of pieces, barrels, breeches, wheels, ammunition, each requiring teams of men to carry. Giap's engineers disassembled 24 Soviet-made 105 mm howitzers. They stripped them down to components small enough for human porterage. They carved new trails up the mountain slopes, sometimes cutting steps directly into the rock. They used tens of thousands of laborers to haul each piece, relay style, to the heights overlooking the French base. Once on the ridgelines, they reassembled the guns in caves and bunkers dug deep into the hillsides. They camouflaged the positions with jungle foliage, changing it daily to avoid detection. They pre-sighted their guns on the French airstrip and strongpoints below. By day, the positions were invisible. French reconnaissance flights saw nothing but jungle. By night, the Viet Minh worked, hauling shells, reinforcing positions, preparing. And they brought anti-aircraft guns, 37 mm and 20 mm flak cannons, dozens of them, ringing the valley. These would deny the French the one advantage they relied upon, air superiority. By early March 1954, General Giap had achieved the impossible. He had surrounded Điện Biên Phủ with a force more than 4 times the size of the French garrison. He had positioned heavy artillery on the high ground. He had dug trenches that snaked toward the French perimeter, zigzagging to avoid direct fire, creeping closer each night. The French inside the valley knew something was building. Patrols reported increased Viet Minh activity. Intelligence suggested enemy reinforcements. But the true scale of what surrounded them remained invisible. On the afternoon of March 13, 1954, the French would learn the truth. Because at 5 p.m. that day, the jungle hills exploded. And the Battle of Điện Biên Phủ began. March 13, 1954, 5 p.m. The opening barrage was apocalyptic. Over 100 artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously. Shells rained down on the French positions, on bunkers, trenches, the airstrip, the command post. The earth shook. The sky filled with smoke and fire. Inside the French strongpoints, the shock was total. This was not supposed to happen. The Viet Minh were not supposed to have this kind of firepower. The first target was Beatrice, the northernmost strongpoint, manned by the elite 3rd Battalion, 13th Demi-Brigade of the Foreign Legion. Beatrice guarded the approaches to the airstrip. Its fall would open the door to the entire base. For 4 hours, Viet Minh artillery pounded Beatrice without pause. Bunkers collapsed. Trenches caved in. Communications lines were severed. French counter-battery fire was futile. They couldn't locate the enemy guns hidden in the hills. Then, at nightfall, the infantry assault began. Thousands of Viet Minh soldiers surged forward in coordinated waves. They used satchel charges to destroy French bunkers. They advanced through their own casualties, pushing relentlessly toward the French trenches. The foreign legionnaires fought with desperate courage, but they were overwhelmed. By midnight, Beatrice had fallen. The survivors, fewer than 200 men from a garrison of over 500, retreated to the central base. The Viet Minh held the northern hills. And then they turned their guns on the airstrip. March 14th. At dawn, French aircraft attempted to land, carrying reinforcements and supplies. Viet Minh anti-aircraft fire ripped through them. One transport was shot down. Others took hits and barely limped back to Hanoi. The airstrip, cratered by artillery, swept by machine gun fire, became a death trap. Landings ceased. From that moment forward, the French garrison could only be resupplied by parachute drops. The lifeline had become a trickle. The next night, March 15th, the Viet Minh attacked Gabriel, another northern strongpoint held by Algerian troops. Again, the pattern repeated, hours of devastating artillery fire, followed by massed infantry assaults. The fighting was savage, hand-to-hand in collapsing trenches. By dawn on March 16th, Gabriel had fallen. The northern defenses were gone. Colonel de Castries, the French commander, realized the enormity of the disaster. His artillery commander, Colonel Charles Peyroth, had assured him the French guns could suppress any Viet Minh artillery. Peyroth had been catastrophically wrong. Unable to bear the shame, Peyroth walked into his bunker and pulled the pin on a grenade, killing himself. The psychological collapse had begun. The next phase of the battle was not dramatic. It was grinding, claustrophobic, and relentless. The Viet Minh did not launch another major assault for weeks. Instead, they employed siege tactics perfected over centuries of warfare. They dug. Trench by trench, tunnel by tunnel, the Viet Minh network crept toward the French positions. They used a zigzag pattern to avoid enfilade fire. They burrowed under the muddy valley floor, sometimes advancing only 10 or 20 meters per night. But they never stopped. By late March, Viet Minh trenches were within grenade-throwing distance of French positions. Snipers picked off anyone who showed themselves above ground. Mortar fire was constant. Sleep became impossible. The French perimeter contracted. Annemarie, defended by Thai auxiliary troops, was abandoned on March 17th when the garrison deserted en masse. The strongpoints Huguette, Dominique, and Elaine became islands in a shrinking sea, connected only by desperate night patrols. Rain began in late March. The valley, already churned by artillery, became a swamp. Trenches filled with water. Wounded men drowned in mud. Supplies dropped by parachute drifted into Viet Minh lines or sank into the mire. The stench of death and decay permeated everything. Inside the shrinking perimeter, morale disintegrated. Soldiers huddled in flooded bunkers, waiting for the next barrage. Medical facilities overflowed with wounded, over 2,000 casualties by early April, with no way to evacuate them. On March 30th, the Viet Minh launched Phase 2 of the assault, targeting the eastern strongpoints. Dominique and Elaine became battlegrounds for savage night fighting. The pattern repeated: artillery storms, human wave assaults, brutal close combat. Elaine, too, a hill position, changed hands multiple times in a single night. French paratroopers and foreign legionnaires launched desperate counterattacks, retaking positions at bayonet point, only to be driven back by fresh Viet Minh waves. By mid-April, the French controlled only the central command post and a handful of shattered strongpoints. The perimeter had shrunk to less than 2 square miles. Over 3,000 wounded lay in underground bunkers, beyond the reach of medicine or mercy. Parachute drops continued, but many missed the shrinking drop zones. French pilots, flying through walls of anti-aircraft fire, watched their cargo fall into enemy hands. In Hanoi, the French command debated desperate options. Break out. Impossible. The jungle was crawling with Viet Minh. Reinforce. With what? The best French units were already trapped in the valley. Airstrikes? Ineffective against dug-in positions. In Washington, the United States considered intervention, Even nuclear weapons were discussed. President Eisenhower ultimately refused. France would face this alone. On May 1, 1954, General Giap launched the final phase, a coordinated, all-out assault on the remaining French positions. For 6 days, the Viet Minh attacked without pause. Artillery fire was continuous. Infantry waves came day and night. Flamethrowers and satchel charges cleared bunkers. The French fought with the courage of the doomed, but they were out of ammunition, out of food, and out of hope. On May 7, 1954, at 5:30 p.m., General de Castries radioed Hanoi. "The enemy is everywhere. The situation is desperate. We are blowing up our installations. Goodbye." Minutes later, the Viet Minh overran the command bunker. The tricolor flag came down. A red flag with a gold star went up. After 56 days, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu was over. The cost of Dien Bien Phu was staggering. Over 2,200 French Union soldiers lay dead in the valley. Another 5,600 were wounded. Nearly 11,000, the remnants of the garrison, were marched into captivity. Fewer than 3,000 would survive the brutal trek to Viet Minh prison camps. The Viet Minh losses were even higher. Estimates suggest 8,000 killed and over 15,000 wounded, casualty rates exceeding 30%. But unlike the French, the Viet Minh could afford the losses. They had won. And that victory would change the world. News of the fall of Dien Bien Phu reached Paris on May 8, the anniversary of Nazi Germany's surrender in 1945. The symbolism was crushing. 9 years after defeating one empire, France had been defeated by a colonized people it had ruled for nearly a century. Public opinion in France, already exhausted by 8 years of colonial war, collapsed. The government fell. The political will to continue fighting evaporated. In July 1954, the Geneva Conference convened to negotiate an end to the Indochina War. The outcome was the Geneva Accords, signed on July 21. Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel. The communist Viet Minh in the north, a pro-Western government in the south. Elections were promised for 1956 to reunify the country. Those elections never happened. The United States, fearing the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, stepped into the vacuum left by France. American military advisors arrived in South Vietnam. American money propped up the Saigon government. The seeds of the Second Indochina War, the Vietnam War, were sown in the ashes of Dien Bien Phu. But the battle's significance extended far beyond Vietnam. Dien Bien Phu was a revelation, a demonstration that technological superiority, air power, and industrial might could be overcome by determination, ingenuity, and popular mobilization. For colonized peoples across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the message was unmistakable. Empires could be defeated. Independence was possible. The age of European colonialism, already crumbling after World War II, received its death blow in a remote Vietnamese valley. Dien Bien Phu became a symbol, a rallying cry for anti-colonial movements from Algeria to Angola. Revolutionary leaders studied Giap's tactics. Guerrilla movements adopted his strategies of patience, mobility, and logistical creativity. And empires took notice. The lesson was clear: asymmetric warfare, waged by a committed population, could bleed even superpowers. Today, the valley of Dien Bien Phu is quiet. A museum stands where the French command bunker once lay. Monuments honor the fallen, both Viet Minh and French. Farmers till the soil where artillery once churned the earth. But the echoes of that battle remain in the strategies of insurgencies worldwide. in the caution of modern militaries facing unconventional wars, in the memory of what happens when overconfidence meets resolve. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was not just a military defeat. It was the end of an idea, the idea that empires could endure through force alone. In that muddy valley, surrounded by jungle hills, the 20th century's colonial order died. And a new era began. On May 7, 1954, the last French strongholds at Dien Bien Phu fell. Over 11,000 French Union soldiers were captured, marking the definitive end of French colonial rule in Indochina and sparking a wave of anti-colonial movements across the globe. The victory was a testament to the Viet Minh's logistical brilliance, their strategic patience, and their ability to overcome vast technological disparities. It proved that a determined, well-led popular army could defeat a modern, Western power. The geopolitical consequences were immediate and profound. The Geneva Accords divided Vietnam, setting the stage for decades of further conflict, and the United States, watching from the sidelines, began to draw its own fateful conclusions about intervention in Southeast Asia. Dien Bien Phu wasn't just a battle lost, it was an empire ended, and a new global order irrevocably forged. If you want to understand the monumental struggles and the geopolitical earthquakes that reshaped the modern world, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment below. We want to know, do you believe the French decision to establish the Dien Bien Phu base was an unavoidable gamble or an act of fatal overconfidence? Thanks for watching.